The ache for solitude was a physical need, a hunger in my bones that years of sand, noise, and shared bunks had failed to satisfy. After 22 years in the Marine Corps, rising to the rank of Master Sergeant, the only command I wanted to follow was the gentle pull of a fishing line on a quiet morning. My wife, Sarah, had found this place, a small, forgotten lot on the western shore of Heron Lake, grandfathered in before the developers arrived with their bulldozers and their blueprints for uniform perfection. It was our after plan, the sanctuary waiting for us at the end of my service. I came home from my final deployment to a folded flag instead of her embrace. Fulfilling our shared dream alone was the only way I knew how to keep my promise to her, to build a fortress for her memory on the land she had chosen. The house was modest, a single-story cedar cabin with a wide deck and a stone fireplace that smelled of 100 winter fires. Its real treasure lay beyond the lawn, a sturdy wooden pier that stretched 50 feet out into the clear, cool water. It was there, on that pier, that I felt closest to her, the gentle lapping of the waves, a conversation we could no longer have. For 6 months, I had found a fragile peace. My days fell into a simple, disciplined rhythm, up at 0500 coffee on the deck as the sun burned the mist off the lake. A slow walk of my property line, my own private perimeter patrol, and then hours spent sanding, sealing, and reinforcing the pier she would never see. This particular morning, the silence was broken by the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. A gleaming white SUV, the kind that had never seen a speck of mud, rolled to a stop. A woman emerged from the driver's side. She was in her late 40s, dressed in crisp, white linen capris and a pastel pink polo shirt with a small, stylized heron embroidered on the chest. Her blonde hair was shellacked into a helmet of improbable stability, and she carried a large wicker basket that looked more like a prop than a genuine article. I watched her approach from my deck, my body instinctively assuming a posture of parade rest, a lifetime of training impossible to shed. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, her gaze sweeping over my property with an air of appraisal, not admiration. Her eyes lingered on the pier. "Hello there," she called out, her voice a bright, brittle thing. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Cynthia Vance, president of the Crestwood Shores Homeowners Association." "Alex," I said, my voice flat, offering no surname. I didn't invite her up. Her smile didn't falter, but it didn't reach her eyes, either. "Just Alex. A man of mystery, I love it." "Well, Alex, I've brought you a little welcome basket. It has some local jams, a bottle of wine, and all the community paperwork you'll need to get settled in." She hefted the basket. "That's kind of you, but unnecessary," I said. "I'm already settled." "Oh, of course, but you'll need to review the covenants and sign the membership forms. We have our monthly board meeting next week, and we'd love to formally welcome you to the Crestwood Shores family." She said family, with an emphasis that sounded more like a threat than an invitation. I walked to the edge of the deck, my boots making a solid, definitive sound on the wood. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. My property isn't part of Crestwood Shores." Cynthia's smile finally cracked, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. "What? That's impossible. We encompass the entire western shore." "Not quite," I explained, keeping my tone level, a technique I'd used to de-escalate situations with nervous lieutenants and hot-headed lance corporals. "This lot, number 7, was privately owned and deeded in 1972. The Crestwood Shores development was established in 1998. My property was never annexed, sold to, or incorporated into your association. I'm not required to join, so I won't be." The disbelief in her eyes hardened into something colder. She placed the basket on the ground, the gesture oddly aggressive. "Well, that's just an oversight. I'm sure. A clerical error we can rectify. For the good of the community. Of course. We can't have rogue properties mucking up our property values and aesthetic uniformity." Her gaze drifted past me, back to the long, sturdy pier, stretching out into the lake. "Once you're a member," she continued, a predatory gleam in her eyes, "that pier will be a wonderful community asset. We've been wanting to establish a shared access point on this side of the lake for years." A cold stillness settled over me. She wasn't just talking about a structure of wood and nails. She was talking about Sarah's pier. "Let me be perfectly clear, ma'am," I said, my voice dropping into a lower register, the one my men used to call my Master Sergeant voice. "This is private property, all of it, the house, the land, and the pier. It is not, and will not be, a community asset. It's mine. Now. I appreciate you stopping by, but I have work to do." I turned without waiting for a reply and walked back toward my front door. I could feel her glare boring into my back, a palpable wave of indignation and fury. The peace had been a temporary ceasefire. Nothing more. I had just met the enemy, and she had already laid claim to the one piece of ground I would defend to my last breath. The war for Heron Lake had just begun. My refusal to be conscripted into Cynthia's suburban army was not taken as a final answer, but as the opening salvo of a campaign she intended to win by attrition. Since I was legally outside her jurisdiction, she couldn't levy fines or place liens on my property. This fact, rather than dissuading her, seemed to enrage her further, driving her to wage a war of psychological operations, attempting to enforce her will through sheer intimidation and bureaucratic pantomime. The first notice appeared 3 days after our initial encounter. It was tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck, enclosed in a slick plastic sheath to protect it from the morning dew. The paper was thick, embossed with the same stylized heron from her polo shirt. The letterhead read, "Crestwood Shores HOA, Office of Compliance." The tone was chillingly formal. "Official notice of violation." The header screamed in a bold serif font. "Re-bylaw, 14 Section 3, Approved Vehicular Aesthetics. Dear resident, please be advised that the vehicle present at your address, a Ford F-150 color magnetic metallic, has been found to be in non-compliance. The community covenants stipulate that all vehicles regularly parked on resident properties must be of a luxury make or a late model SUV in a neutral color palette. Work trucks are expressly forbidden. Failure to remove the offending vehicle within 48 hours will result in further action." I read it twice, a grim smile playing on my lips. It was absurd, of course, but it was also a fascinating piece of psychological warfare. It was designed to make me feel small, to create the illusion of power where none existed. I took the notice inside, not to the trash can, but to my small home office. I had a file cabinet, a relic from my days as a company first sergeant, where I kept meticulous records. I opened a new hanging folder and placed a label on it, typed in crisp, block letters, Vance, Cynthia, Peace Ops. I slid the notice inside. This was not a neighborhood dispute. This was an engagement with a hostile force. And the first rule of any engagement is to gather intelligence. The notices kept coming, appearing taped to my front door or mailbox. Each was a masterpiece of petty tyranny. I received a violation for the color of the cover on my fishing boat, a simple gray tarp. Apparently, only Crestwood beige or shoreline taupe were acceptable. I received another for my mailbox, a standard black rural-style box that had been there for 30 years. It was a non-conforming mail receptacle, a violation of a bylaw that mandated every home have a decorative, heron-shaped mailbox that cost $300. Another notice informed me that the small vegetable garden Sarah had planted near the side of the house, now overflowing with tomatoes and zucchini, was an unapproved agricultural installation. With each notice, my methodical response was the same. I would photograph it in place, then take it to my office and file it in the PSYOPS folder. I pulled out the thick binder containing my property survey, the original deed, and the county charter. I spent an evening highlighting every line that confirmed my property's legal independence from the Crestwood Shores development plat. I cross-referenced the county's property tax database online, confirming my parcel number was distinct and unassociated with the HOA's collective. I was building a case file, reinforcing my legal position, not because I doubted it, but because my training demanded it. Always know your terrain. Always have your documentation in order. I tried to gauge the sentiment of the other residents. I struck up a conversation with a man named Tom, who lived 2 houses down within the HOA's borders. He was a quiet software engineer who seemed perpetually weary. I met him at the end of his driveway as he was taking his recycling bin in. "Morning," I said, offering a neighborly nod. "I'm Alex." "Tom," he replied, shaking my hand briefly. His eyes darted around nervously, as if he were afraid of being seen talking to me. "Your HOA president seems passionate," I said, a deliberate understatement. Tom let out a short, bitter laugh. "Passionate, she's a fanatic. She rules this place like it's her own private kingdom. My wife got a notice last week because her garden gnomes were not in harmony with the naturalistic aesthetic. We had to get rid of them." "She's been leaving these on my door," I said, deciding to share a piece of intel. "She seems to think her rules apply to my property." Tom's eyes widened. "You're the guy on the point, the one who isn't in the HOA." "That's me." "Man, she is obsessed with you," he said, lowering his voice. "At the last meeting, she spent 20 minutes talking about the uncooperative element and the need to bring the entire shoreline into compliance. She's trying to get the HOA's lawyer to find a loophole to force you to join." "Let her try," I said calmly. "Her lawyer will find the law is the law." The conversation with Tom was invaluable. It confirmed Cynthia wasn't just a rogue actor. She was using the institutional power of the HOA to fuel her personal vendetta. I went back to my office and added a new document to my file, Witness Statements, where I logged the date, time, and summary of my conversation with Tom. Cynthia thought she was burying me in paper, but with every ridiculous notice she delivered, she was just handing me more ammunition, strengthening my fortress of legality, one piece of paper at a time. She was the architect of her own downfall, and I was simply the archivist. When her campaign of issuing legally impotent notices failed to produce my capitulation, Cynthia escalated her tactics from bureaucratic intimidation to minor acts of physical aggression. The objective was the same: to make my life so unpleasant that I would either surrender or leave. The methods, however, became more invasive, crossing the line from harassment to property damage, always cloaked in a thin, flimsy veneer of deniability. The first incident was subtle. The property line between my lot and the adjacent HOA property was clearly marked by a line of old, moss-covered stones. The HOA employed a landscaping crew that mowed and manicured the community land right up to that border. One morning, after the mowers had been through, I found a 3-foot-wide swath of my own lawn covered in a thick carpet of wet, mulched grass clippings. It was a petty, deliberate act aimed directly from the side discharge of their commercial mower onto my property. To an observer, it might look like carelessness. To me, it was a message, as clear as if it had been spray-painted on my wall. Your boundaries mean nothing. We can and will cross them. I didn't march over to the landscapers. I didn't call Cynthia to complain. My response was tactical. I went to my office, logged the incident in my file, Vance, C, Addendum Property Intrusion, and took several time-stamped photos of the clippings from multiple angles. Then, I spent an hour raking it up. As I worked, I formulated my countermove. It was time to upgrade my surveillance capabilities. That evening, I was on the phone with a man I hadn't spoken to in 6 months. "Gunny," I said into the receiver, looking out my window at the darkening lake. "It's Alex." "Skipper," his familiar, gravelly voice boomed back. "Good to hear your voice. Thought you'd have gone soft on me. What with all that fishing and fresh air?" "Not a chance." I chuckled. "Listen, I'm setting up a new AO, and I need some eyes. I'm dealing with some local hostiles. Low-level stuff for now, but they're following a predictable escalation matrix. I need a robust surveillance package. Full perimeter coverage, night vision. The works?" Gunny, my former company gunnery sergeant, and a master of logistics and security, immediately understood. We spoke for half an hour in the coded shorthand of our shared profession, discussing fields of fire, thermal imaging versus infrared, data redundancy, and secure cloud storage. He recommended a specific military-grade system, one not available to the general public, and promised to make a call to a supplier he knew. "I'll have the package rerouted from a government contract," he said. "No paper trail back to you. Consider it a professional courtesy. Master Sergeant." 2 weeks later, 4 discreet, matte black cameras arrived. I spent a weekend installing them myself, my movements precise and efficient. One was positioned with a commanding view of my driveway and front approach. Another covered the side of the house and the vegetable garden. A third watched over my boat and the path to the pier. The fourth, a sophisticated pan-tilt zoom model. I mounted high on a mature oak tree near the property line, camouflaging it perfectly. It had a clear, unobstructed view of the adjacent HOA property and the street beyond. From my office, I now had a complete 360-degree, high-definition view of my entire perimeter. My situational awareness was now total. The system paid dividends almost immediately. A few nights later, my boat cover, a heavy-duty canvas I always secured with 6 taut bungee cords, was mysteriously flapping in the wind. A review of the footage from 2:30 a.m. showed 2 figures, their faces obscured by hoodies, creeping onto the edge of my property and unhooking the straps. They were careful, but not careful enough. The PTZ camera zoomed in on the shoes of one of the figures as they retreated a distinctive pair of limited edition basketball sneakers. The same kind I had seen Cynthia's teenage son wearing a few days prior. It wasn't enough for a positive ID in court, but it was enough for my own intelligence file. I saved the clip, labeling it Vandalism Incident CO1. The final act in this phase of her campaign was the most personal. I came down to the pier one morning to find deep, ugly gouges in the new handrail I had just spent a week sanding and sealing. It looked as if someone had repeatedly and violently struck it with a rock or a hammer. My heart seized in my chest. This wasn't just my property. This was Sarah's. This was the sanctuary I was building for her memory. The violation felt profound, a desecration. I stood there for a long moment, my hands clenched into fists, a cold, familiar rage building behind my eyes. It was the same rage I'd felt when I lost good men to senseless violence, a feeling I thought I had left behind in the deserts of Afghanistan. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the discipline to overcome the emotion. Rage was a liability. It clouded judgment. I turned my back on the damaged rail, walked back to the house, and pulled the surveillance footage. The camera watching the pier had captured it all. A lone figure, moving under the faint light of a crescent moon. The resolution wasn't perfect at that distance, but the person's build, their angry, jerky movements, their spiteful final kick at the post before retreating. It was unmistakably Cynthia Vance herself. I saved the video. I didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. A single skirmish doesn't win a war. She thought she was landing blows in the dark, chipping away at my resolve. She had no idea she was simply walking deeper into a trap, providing me with irrefutable proof of her escalating criminality, all recorded in crystal clear high definition. She was building my case against her, one act of vandalism at a time. Having failed to intimidate me with phantom bylaws and unable to break my spirit with minor vandalism, Cynthia shifted her assault to a new front. My reputation. In a small, tight-knit community like Crestwood Shores, social standing and perception were potent currencies. Her goal was to isolate me, to paint me as a threat, a monster lurking on the edge of their perfect suburbia. Her chosen weapon was the modern-day town square of gossip and slander, the private community Facebook group. The first volley was fired by Cynthia herself. Tom, my reluctant informant, sent me a screenshot. The post was a masterclass in passive-aggressive character assassination. It featured a lovely, sun-drenched photo of the lake taken from the community beach. The caption read, "What a beautiful morning in Crestwood Shores. I feel so blessed to live in a community where we all look out for each other and contribute to our shared safety and values. It's so important to know your neighbors. That's why it's deeply unsettling when individuals choose to live on our very doorstep, but refuse to be part of our community, refusing to contribute to our shared road maintenance, security patrols, or even submit to a simple background check. It makes one wonder what a person like that has to hide." Stay safe. Everyone. Community. First. Safety in numbers. The post was a work of art. It never mentioned my name, but every single resident knew who she was talking about. The reference to a background check was a stroke of evil genius, planting the seed that I was not just uncooperative, but potentially dangerous, a criminal, a fugitive, a predator. The comment section exploded with the predictable mixture of alarm and sycophantic support for Cynthia. "Thank you for looking out for us, Cynthia. So scary," one woman wrote. "I agree," commented another. "My kids play outside. I don't feel comfortable with an unvetted stranger living so close." A man I recognized as Cynthia's husband, Bob Vance, chimed in with a more direct threat. "Some people need to learn that private property doesn't give them the right to be a danger to the rest of us. If he doesn't want to be part of the solution, he's part of the problem. And problems get dealt with." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was different from the notices and the vandalism. Those were attacks on my property. This was an attack on my character, an attempt to poison the well so thoroughly that I would become a pariah. And it was working. The next time I went to the small local grocery store, the cashier, who had always been friendly, suddenly couldn't meet my eye. A woman with 2 small children saw me in the aisle and physically pulled her cart away, shielding her kids as if I were radioactive. I was being tried and convicted in the court of public opinion without a shred of evidence. The isolation was a heavy burden. I had sought solitude, but I had not sought exile. The cold shoulders and suspicious stares were a constant, grating reminder of the lie being woven around me. One evening, staring out at the lonely expanse of the lake, I found myself touching the glass of a display case on my mantel. Inside was a neatly folded American flag, the one that had draped Sarah's casket. Beside it was my bronze star, and next to that, a single challenge coin from my unit, its surface worn smooth from years in my pocket. These were the symbols of a life of service, of honor, of sacrifice. And now, in this place, I had chosen for my peace. I was being branded a potential criminal by a woman whose greatest hardship was a discolored garden gnome. The injustice of it all settled deep in my bones, not as hot anger, but as a cold, hard resolve. I would not be driven out by whispers and lies. I opened my laptop and began my own counterintelligence operation. I created a new folder in my Vance C file, labeling it defamation. I saved the screenshots Tom had sent me. I started a detailed log, documenting every cold shoulder, every suspicious glance, cross-referencing them with the timeline of Cynthia's online campaign. I used some of the open-source intelligence skills I'd picked up over the years to track the digital footprint of Cynthia and her most vocal supporters, building a social network map of her power base within the community. This was no longer just about defending my property. It was about defending my honor. It was about defending the memory of the life Sarah and I had planned to build here. Cynthia had escalated the conflict into a war of information. She thought she was defining the narrative, controlling the flow of truth. She was mistaken. She was creating a permanent, digital record of her slander, a trail of libel that was just as damning as the video of her vandalizing my pier. I continued my work, documenting every lie, archiving every post. I was a silent observer, a ghost in her machine. And all the while, the case file against her grew thicker and more damning. When her campaign of slander failed to drive me from my home, Cynthia, growing ever more desperate, escalated to her next logical step, weaponizing legitimate authorities. If her own manufactured power as HOA president was ineffective, she would co-opt the real power of the state and city, twisting it to serve her personal vendetta. She sought to use the uniforms and badges of public servants as a cudgel to beat me into submission. The first official visit came on a Tuesday morning. I was on the pier, replacing the last of the gouged handrail boards, when I saw a sheriff's department cruiser pull into my driveway. A deputy, young and cautious, got out and approached the house. I laid down my tools, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked up to meet him. My demeanor was deliberately non-threatening, my hands visible, my posture relaxed. "Help you, deputy?" I asked. "Sir, are you Alex?" he asked, his hand resting near the butt of his sidearm. "We received a call for a wellness check. A concerned neighbor reported they hadn't seen you in several days and were worried something might have happened. Mentioned you were a veteran and might be unwell." The insidiousness of the tactic was breathtaking. She had used my service, the very thing I was most proud of, and twisted it into a suggestion that I was unstable, a potential danger to myself or others. She was trying to get me flagged as a mentally unstable veteran. "I'm fine, deputy," I said calmly. "I was just down on my pier. As you can see, I'm quite well." I gestured to the wood, the tools, the sweat on my brow. "The concerned neighbor who called you, was her name Cynthia Vance? By any chance?" The deputy's professional mask slipped for a second. "I can't disclose the name of the complainant, sir." "You don't have to," I said. "This is part of an ongoing, documented campaign of harassment against me. She's the HOA president next door. I'd be happy to show you the file." I invited him inside and briefly walked him through the highlights, the meaningless violation notices, the photos of the vandalism, the screenshots of the Facebook posts. I presented it not as an angry victim, but as a fellow professional laying out a series of escalating events. I showed him my retired military ID and the flag case on the mantel. The young deputy's demeanor shifted from cautious to apologetic. "Master Sergeant," he said, the respect automatic. "I am very sorry to have bothered you. This is clearly malicious. I'll be sure to note in my report that the call was unfounded and likely made in bad faith. If she calls again, we'll handle it differently." After he left, I logged the incident, including the deputy's name and the report number he gave me. Round 1 had been a failure for her, but she wasn't done. A week later, a different vehicle came down my driveway. This one belonged to the Department of Natural Resources. A uniformed DNR officer, a woman with a stern, weather-beaten face, held a clipboard. "I'm here to inspect your dock," she announced without preamble. "We've received a complaint that it's an unpermitted structure, constructed with non-approved materials, and that it's leaching toxic chemicals into the lake." This was a more sophisticated attack, targeting the very heart of my sanctuary, the pier. But Sarah and I had been nothing if not thorough. "Of course," I said, leading the way down to the water. "I assume the complaint was anonymous." "It was," she confirmed, eyeing the pier critically. "Let me save you some time," I said. I went back to the house and returned with a heavy, waterproof document tube. From it, I produced the original county building permit for the pier, dated 1974. I then handed her a laminated copy of the original environmental impact statement. Finally, I gave her a multi-page engineering report that I had commissioned myself just 3 months prior when I began my restoration work, complete with a materials analysis confirming that all the new wood was untreated, marine-grade cedar, and all the hardware was corrosion-resistant stainless steel. She spent 20 minutes poring over the documents, her stern expression slowly melting into one of grudging respect. She walked the length of the pier, stomping on the boards, checking the pilings. "Master Sergeant," she said, reading my name from the top of the engineering report. "This is the most well-documented private pier on this entire lake. The complaint is utter nonsense. You've exceeded every environmental and structural standard required. I'm sorry for the intrusion." I nodded. "I understand. You have a job to do. But this is the second time in as many weeks that a city or state agency has been sent to my home on a fraudulent complaint. I am building a legal case against the perpetrator, and I would appreciate a copy of your official findings for my records." "You'll have it by the end of the day," she promised. I stood on the pier long after she left, watching the ripples on the water. Cynthia was a poor tactician. She didn't understand that every time she misused an official channel. She wasn't creating a problem for me. She was creating a paper trail for herself. Her anonymous calls were being logged. Her baseless complaints were being officially debunked. She thought she was marshaling the forces of the government against me, but, in reality, she was methodically proving my case for me, providing me with official, third-party validation of her malicious harassment. She was loading the very weapon that would ultimately be used against her. The repeated and spectacular failures to dislodge me through bureaucratic channels, vandalism, slander, and weaponized authorities seemed to have stripped away the last vestiges of Cynthia's strategic thinking, leaving only pure, distilled rage. Her campaign had been a series of tactical blunders, each one leaving her more exposed. Now, backed into a corner of her own making, she made her final, most critical error. She abandoned all pretense of subtlety and escalated to a direct, personal threat. The confrontation occurred on a Thursday evening, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line. painting the lake in hues of orange and purple. I was on my deck, cleaning my fishing gear, and enjoying the quiet hum of the cicadas. I detected the movement, first a flicker of white and pastel at the edge of my vision. Cynthia Vance was marching across the HOA manicured lawn towards my property line. She was not alone. Trailing in her wake was her husband, Bob, a large, beefy man whose expensive golf shirt couldn't hide a soft midsection and a face permanently flushed with anger. Two other men from the neighborhood, men I recognized as part of Cynthia's inner circle from the Facebook group, flanked them like a clumsy honor guard. I didn't move from my chair. I simply stopped wiping down my fishing reel and watched them approach. My body calm, my mind alert. My training had taught me to read situations, to assess threats long before they fully materialized. This was a deliberate show of force, an attempt at physical intimidation. They stopped just short of the stone border that marked my land, a four-person wall of suburban fury. "We are done with the games. Alex!" Cynthia spat, her voice tight and venomous. She dispensed with my last name, a deliberate, contemptuous familiarity. I remained silent, letting her exhaust her own momentum. I placed the fishing reel carefully on the table beside me. "This is your last chance," she continued, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are going to sign the membership papers. You are going to pay your back dues for the last 6 months. And you are going to sign over a permanent community access easement to that pier. You are going to do it tonight." I picked up my coffee mug and took a slow sip. "No," I said simply. The single word seemed to detonate the air. Bob Vance took a step forward, his chest puffed out, his feet planting on my side of the property line. "You think you're some kind of tough guy," he sneered. "Hiding out here in your little cabin. You're one man. We are a community. We are the board. We run this town. My company is the largest single advertiser in the local paper. I am on the board of the local bank." "We can make your life a living hell," Cynthia hissed, her face a mask of incandescent rage. "We can tie you up in lawsuits you can't afford. We'll file a new complaint against you every single day. Code enforcement, the sheriff, the DNR, the IRS. We will bury you in so much paper, you'll beg to sell us this house for pennies on the dollar, just to make it stop. This is your last warning." I set my mug down with a quiet click. I rose from my chair, not quickly, but with a deliberate, fluid motion. I did not raise my voice. I did not return their threats. I simply looked at Bob, who was now a full 2 feet inside my property line, and then at the other 2 men who had followed his lead. "You are currently trespassing," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. "Your threats have been noted. I have to inform you that this entire conversation is being recorded by multiple cameras, in high definition, with audio." I let that sink in for a moment. The other 2 men shifted their weight, suddenly looking far less confident. Bob just scoffed. "Your little cameras don't scare us," he growled. "They aren't meant to scare you," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "They are meant to provide evidence for the prosecution." I then looked past them, my eyes focused on the front door of my house, as if I were speaking to someone inside. "You need to understand something. My life has been governed by rules, very specific rules. For the last 22 years, I operated under a strict set of rules of engagement. Those rules governed when and how I was authorized to apply lethal force to protect myself and my unit." I brought my gaze back to lock onto Cynthia's. "Now, in my retirement, I live by a different set of rules. They are the laws of this state, and the laws of this state are very very clear about what a homeowner is justified in doing to repel intruders who have illegally entered their home and present a credible threat. I took a single, deliberate step toward them, stopping at the edge of my own deck. You have brought a force of 4 people to my doorstep to issue direct threats and demands. You have crossed onto my land. You are one step away from crossing a threshold you will not be able to uncross. I would advise you, in the strongest possible terms, to return to your side of the line and reconsider your tactical approach. This is your final de-escalation offer. The military terminology: rules of engagement. Tactical approach: de-escalation offer hung in the air, utterly alien to their world of bylaws and property values. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear appeared in Cynthia's eyes. She had pushed a man she knew nothing about to his absolute limit. She was staring at a locked door, and she was just beginning to realize she had no idea what was on the other side. After a tense, silent standoff that lasted for what felt like an eternity, she gave a curt nod. Her small squad of bullies retreated back across the property line and marched away without another word. I had won the confrontation, but I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that this was not the end. It was the final lull before the assault. The storm broke on a Saturday. Not just the metaphorical one I had been anticipating, but a literal one. A summer squall rolled across Heron Lake just after noon, the sky turning a bruised purple-gray. Rain lashed against the windows of my cabin, and the wind howled through the tall pines. A fitting soundtrack for the coming confrontation. I had spent the morning in a state of heightened readiness, what we used to call Condition 1. I didn't expect them to wait long after the previous evening's humiliation. My surveillance system was active. My phone was charged and close at hand, and I had already placed a call to the county sheriff. Not to his dispatch, but to his personal cell number, which the deputy who had performed the wellness check had discreetly given me. I had given him a heads up about a potential trespassing issue with my neighbors and asked him to ensure a patrol car was in the general vicinity. Just as the storm reached its peak, I was in my living room, performing a ritual as familiar and comforting as breathing field stripping and cleaning my service pistol. A Kimber 1911 that had been my trusted sidearm for my last decade in the Corps. The rhythmic scrape and click of metal on metal was a form of meditation. I was just reassembling the slide when a notification pinged on my phone. Motion, detected driveway. I set the pistol on the coffee table and pulled up the live feed. My heart didn't race. My breathing didn't quicken. A profound, almost serene calm settled over me. The waiting was over. The moment of action was here. Through the sheets of rain, the camera showed Cynthia's white SUV pulling to a screeching halt. But she wasn't alone. Her husband Bob got out of the passenger side, and from the back seat emerged the same 2 men from the night before. They were dressed in rain gear, their faces grim and set. They weren't coming for a conversation. They were an assault team. They marched up my driveway, not toward the front door, but flanking out, moving with a clumsy, unpracticed imitation of a tactical approach. Bob and one of the men headed for the front, while Cynthia and the other circled around toward the deck. She was screaming something that the wind tore away, but her face was a mask of pure, unrestrained fury. They were going to force the issue. They didn't knock. I watched on my monitor as Bob lowered his shoulder and slammed into the front door. The wood splintered around the lock, but the reinforced frame I had installed held firm. He recoiled, shaking his arm. Then, on the other camera, I saw Cynthia, her face pressed against the glass of the sliding door to the deck, shrieking at me. This was it. The final line. Bob hit the front door again, a heavier, More desperate impact, and this time, with a loud crack, the jam gave way and the door swung violently inward. Bob and his friend stumbled into my entryway, rain and leaves swirling in with them. They found me standing in the center of the living room. I hadn't moved. The reassembled and loaded Kimber 1911 was in my hand, held in the low ready position, muzzle pointed safely at the floor. On the large oak coffee table between us, another weapon lay ready, a thick, leather-bound portfolio. Cynthia, seeing the door open, came rushing in behind them, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wild. "This is over!" she screamed, her voice hoarse against the sound of the storm. "We are claiming this pier for the community. This is a community action. You are trespassing on HOA land. We are taking what is ours." I let her finish. Let the insane proclamation hang in the air, a stark contrast to the quiet menace of the scene. I slowly raised my eyes and met Bob's. He and his friend had frozen the moment they saw the pistol. "First," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the storm's fury. "You are mistaken about your location. You are not on HOA land." I used my free hand to gesture toward the portfolio on the table. "That is the original, notarized master deed for this property, recorded with the county in 1972. It contains a full plat survey explicitly stating my property lines and my exclusive riparian rights to the pier and 50 feet of lakebed beyond it. I am the sole, undisputed legal owner. Your authority, your very existence, ends at that line of stones you crossed." I let the weight of that legal finality settle on them. Cynthia's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Second," I continued, my voice hardening, the calm giving way to a core of pure steel. "You have just committed several felonies: breaking and entering, conspiracy, assault. In this state, there is a legal principle known as the Castle Doctrine. I suggest you look it up later. If you have the opportunity, it grants a homeowner wide latitude in the use of force, including lethal force to defend their home and person against violent intruders." I let my gaze drift from Bob to his friend, then back. The color was draining from their faces. "And third," I said, raising my head slightly to look past them, toward the corners of the room. "You see those small black domes? There is one there, and another behind you. They contain cameras. You are being recorded. This entire home invasion, your illegal entry, your screamed threats, all of it is being captured in 4K resolution with audio. As we speak, a copy of this video is being uploaded to a secure, off-site server, and a silent alarm, triggered the moment my door was breached, has already notified the Sheriff's Department of a home invasion in progress at this address." As if on cue, through the howl of the wind and rain, another sound began to intrude. A faint, distant siren, rapidly growing closer, louder, more urgent. The power dynamic didn't just flip, it shattered. The rage on Cynthia's face was replaced by a wave of sickening, ashen horror. Bob and the other men looked like trapped animals, their eyes darting between me, the gun, and the door they had just broken down. They had stormed my home, confident in their numbers and their self-appointed authority. They had found themselves in a meticulously prepared kill box, outmaneuvered not by violence, but by foresight, by the law, and by a discipline they couldn't possibly comprehend. The war was over. Checkmate. The arrival of the sheriff's deputies was a study in controlled chaos. 2 cruisers, lights strobing violently in the gray, rain-soaked afternoon, slid to a halt in my driveway, blocking in Cynthia's SUV. The deputies emerged, weapons drawn, taking tactical positions as they approached the breached doorway. The lead deputy, a man I recognized as the sergeant in charge, barked commands. I did not move. "Sergeant!" I called out, my voice steady. "The homeowner is Alex. I am armed. The intruders are the 4 individuals standing in my entryway. They are unarmed. I am placing my weapon on the table now." I did so, slowly and deliberately, then raised my hands to show they were empty. The deputies swarmed in, the situation quickly and professionally brought under control. Cynthia, Bob, and their 2 accomplices were separated, their sputtering protests and panicked excuses cut short by the firm, no-nonsense authority of law enforcement. The sergeant came over to me, his expression grim. "Master Sergeant," he said, nodding toward my retired ID I had placed on the mantel. "You said there might be trouble. You didn't say they'd be stupid enough to kick in your door." "I have the entire incident on video," I said, pointing to my office. "From their arrival to their illegal entry and subsequent threats. It's already been uploaded, and I can show you the live feed right now." The legal fallout was as severe as it was swift. Presented with crystal-clear video evidence of a felony home invasion, the local prosecutor didn't hesitate. Cynthia, Bob, and their 2 friends were charged with felony breaking and entering, conspiracy, and criminal trespassing. The Vance C. PSY Ops file I had so meticulously maintained became the backbone of the prosecution's case, establishing a clear, undeniable pattern of harassment, intimidation, and escalation that culminated in the assault on my home. Faced with the mountain of evidence, their high-priced lawyer advised them to take a plea deal. They avoided prison time, but were sentenced to 5 years of stringent probation, thousands of dollars in fines and restitution for my door, and court-mandated anger management. Crucially, a permanent restraining order was put in place, forbidding them from ever setting foot on my property or contacting me again. The social consequences were just as devastating for the Vances. Cynthia and Bob were forced to step down from the HOA board in disgrace. The story ripped through the community, a cautionary tale of hubris and obsession. The once feared queen of Crestwood Shores became a pariah. Within a year, a for sale sign stood on their lawn. With the Vances gone, the toxic atmosphere they had cultivated dissipated like the morning mist on the lake. Tom, my quiet neighbor, was reluctantly elected the new HOA president. He and the new board systematically dismantled the ridiculous and punitive bylaws, transforming the association from a petty dictatorship into a genuinely helpful community organization. I finally had my peace, the real peace, deep and abiding. I finished restoring Sarah's Pier, its wood smooth and strong beneath my bare feet. The quiet of my mornings was now broken only by the cry of a loon or the splash of a leaping bass. I had come home seeking a sanctuary, a quiet place to honor the memory of my wife. I had been forced to turn that sanctuary into a fortress, to fight one last battle I never wanted. But as I stood on the pier in the golden light of a setting sun, I knew I had honored her. I had defended our dream, and the quiet that settled around me was the sound of victory.